What made you decide to start your own business rather than join a firm?
I think probably a desire for freedom more than anything. I'd got a bit of financial freedom, and I didn't really feel like working for anybody else, I think.
Yeah.
I look back at it and realise what an unbelievable business model I stumbled upon. I mean, there's an element of luck in it. It was luck that I wanted to start a business at the time that the internet was suddenly beginning to froth. But I stumbled upon an incredible business model there. And of course, you don't sell a business if there isn't more growth in it, because no one's going to buy it unless you can demonstrate that there's more growth in it. And I do think when it comes to selling a business that there's some real satisfaction to be had in watching a business actually grow.
Hello and welcome to Inspired Sounds, Rathbone's exclusive podcast dedicated to supporting and empowering entrepreneurs. In each episode, we dive into the journey of inspirational entrepreneurs and founders who we invite to share the thrills and spills of their own journey. We hope you enjoy listening.
This is Inspired Sounds. My name is Rebecca Tunstall. I'm one of the investment directors at Rathbones, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Nick Jenkins, Moonpig founder. Morning, Nick.
Good morning.
So just to start off, I wonder if you could give us an overview of your journey and how you started and grew Moonpig.
Well, I started out, I read Russian at university, and I was supposed to go into the army, but I got offered a very interesting job in Russia, and I went and did that for 10 years, which led me to become an agricultural commodity trader in Moscow. And at a fascinating period. It was 1991 to 98, which was the end of the Soviet Union, so I watched that, and then I watched the first and the second coups in Russia. So it was a fascinating lesson in history, if nothing else, and a really wonderful experience. But I'd been there for about 10 years, and I wanted to come back and do something else. I wasn't going to be doing commodity trading, so I had to think of a business plan, and I went off and did an MBA for a year at Cranfield while I thought of various different business plans. And of all of the ideas that I had there, the one that survived was the one for Moonpig, which I started the week I left Cranfield.
What made you decide to start your own business rather than join a firm?
I think probably a desire for freedom more than anything. I'd done quite well in the job that I'd had in Russia, and so I had I'd got a bit of financial freedom, and I didn't really feel like working for anybody else, I think. And that's probably the main driver of being an entrepreneur, is that sense of being your own boss.
So you started Moonpig. Tell us a little bit about those early years.
Well, so I had the idea for Moonpig, and I was really inspired by of all the ideas that I had. I realized I probably ought to do something on the internet, and then when I narrowed that down, there were physical things you could sell on the internet, but I realized that somebody would eventually invent an algorithm that would compare the price and squeeze all the profit out of that. And then digital things, unfortunately everybody wanted digital things. Anything that could be downloaded, people wanted for free. So that really wasn't going to be much of a starter. And then there's content, but you make your money out of advertising. And in those early days, nobody was really spending much money on online advertising. It's very different now, but certainly back then it was difficult. So I set about thinking of a business that could use the internet to create something completely unique. And I had the idea of personalization is one of those things. Particularly if it's personalization that's difficult to do in a shop environment, the only place you can really do that is online. And then so when I narrowed it down to internet and personalization, I came up with the idea of personalizing greeting cards, because I used to Tipex out the caption on greeting cards and Tipex something much ruder on the front, which seemed to be amusing. I know we're British, we do that sort of thing. And so allowing people to be able to do that, but combining it with the economies of scale of the internet, that meant that a person could order a single personalized card, and using a digital printer that could be printed and sent back to them the same day, that seemed like a winner to me. And not an entirely novel idea. I mean, we're still greeting cards. We know that market exists. We know what people are prepared to pay. We know how often they buy them. So the twist that I was adding, and it's just a twist, was that it was a much better card because it was personalized. And adding value is not just about saying happy birthday, John. It's about weaving someone's name into a joke or weaving a photograph in. Albeit, bear in mind, this was 19 1998. I mean, this was 1999. This was so early. Digital photography basically didn't exist in those days. So it was about personalization with words. The digital photography bit came later. So that seemed like a winner. And once I'd got enough money to get started, I got enough money to get the website going and produce a product. and with that, when people saw the product, they loved it. I think perhaps one of the other key things that I did very early on is I realized that the quality of the design itself is utterly critical. And I went to all the really, really good greeting card publishers, certainly my favorites anyway, and approached them and said, would you license your best designs to me in return for a royalty, which they did. And so I was choosing from cards that had already been proven as great greeting card designs. And what most people don't understand is that for every greeting card they see in the shop, probably 10 have been rejected by the greeting card publishing company. And of the ones that are in the shop, probably only 20-30% of them sell a lot. There's a massive pyramid, and so like an iceberg, really, of designs. So we cherry-picked the very best ones, and the ones that lent themselves to personalization. And it was a winner. Great product.
And I love the story. How did you come up with the name Moonpig?
Yes, everyone asked that. Well, in those days, I think a great mistake with the internet was that domain names were given away virtually for free. They were ridiculously cheap to book. And as a result, lots of names got blocked. They got bought by somebody and then held to sell to somebody for millions later on. But as a result, it became quite hard to find a good domain name. So people were scratching around for names that were unique on Google. And one way of doing that is a juxtaposition of two words, like bluetomatoes.com, because blue tomatoes wouldn't normally be next to each other. But all of those have been booked up a long time in advance. And I spent 4 days typing in names into the internet and trying to find a domain name that was available. And my basic criteria was simple, which is that it had to be as few syllables as possible, and it had to be phonetic. It had to not mean anything rude in any known major language, and it had to be easily representable by a graphic. And I didn't want something that necessarily described what we did, because if I'd called it the online greeting card company.co.uk, I don't think it would have been as successful. So I chose, Moonpig was actually a nickname of mine at school, but it also was a fairly unique word. And I entered it into the computer and looked it up. I had assumed actually it was a character from the Clangers. It was some nickname I got when I was 11. And I thought it was a character from the Clangers, but turned out it wasn't. And there was no other reference to it on Google. So the main thing I was looking for was something with no other reference to it on Google. So if you put Moonpig in, bang, our website would come up. And then I thought about it. You can't misspell moon and you can't misspell pig. You could relatively easily represent that in a logo with a picture of a moon and a picture of a pig. It certainly doesn't mean anything rude in any known language. And so having tried for another couple of days to try and find something, I stuck with that. And it worked really well. And no one would ever mistake our name. And interestingly enough, we had a small competition, a small competitor. And they were originally called remind4you.com. And the problem with that is that you then have to explain to people, well, it's remind4you.com. Is that F-O-U-R, or is that letter 4? Is that U as in Y-O-U, or is that the letter U? That doesn't work. Just doesn't work. That company got bought out of administration by W.H. Smith, and they decided to rename it. And I think they probably looked at Moonpig and thought, let's do a funky animal-based name, and they called it Funky Pigeon. The mistake they made in their own press release was they misspelled pigeon. It's actually quite a difficult word to spell for some people. So one of the things that I talk about when I talk about branding to people who are setting up a business is just go through those rules. First of all, is it available? Much easier to use a domain name that's already available than trying to buy one, which is expensive. And certainly never, ever make the mistake of developing a business and trying to buy the domain name later, because you will then pay through the nose for it. People will smell blood. And so don't do that. Pick your domain name first and then build the brand around it. Is it available on Google? Is it phonetic? Can it be mistaken? How easily transmitted is it orally? And then is there any other reference to it to that word or that phrase? And those are the things that make it very, very easy to make yourself distinctive.
And do you think that's a big key to the success of the brand, that brand recognition? I mean, you still have probably one of the catchiest jingles that has ever existed.
It is very catchy, but I think brands are not invented from scratch. Brands are the values and the qualities of a company, and that then get so if Moonpig had been awful and the designs had been dreadful, no, it wouldn't have been successful. It wasn't about the brand, but the brand matched the quality of the product and the service as well. So we got the product right, we got the service right, and Moonpig was a very catchy name for that. But really, people say I've invented a brilliant brand, and I would disagree with that, because I think brand is something that a company builds up through the quality of service, the quality of the product. Everything is the brand, and if the name happens to match that well, that's great. That's great branding. But so some very good products with bad names and vice versa. But it's the two coming together that make a good brand.
And can you talk us through a little bit, Nick, the strategy that you adopted to grow the business? Because it ended up as a very large business before you stepped away.
Well, it was quite simple, really. We started the business in 1999, 2000. We started raising money in 2000, just after the boo.com collapse. And so a lot of VCs have been turned off direct-to-consumer e-commerce businesses. And so we weren't going to raise any money that way. So we had to raise money from angels, we had to scale down our ambitions, and we had to do so with very little money. And to some extent, the advantage of that is that when you don't have very much money, you have to really focus on what's working and what's not working and make decisions very, very quickly. Also, there's no point in spending £100,000 to discover that a particular advertising channel doesn't work for you when you could spend 2 or 3. I think that one of the few things that I ever looked into my MBA textbooks for was some statistical analysis formulae that would work out what's the minimum that I need to spend on this particular campaign to work out with some statistical significance that I can rely on that cost of customer acquisition. Because so if we could spend £2,000 to find out that a particular form of banner advertising worked or didn't work for us, that's what we'd spend. We spend the bare minimum. So we worked our way through all the channels of customer acquisition until we could find anything that we could throw money at. And the problem was, for many years, actually, there was nothing that we could throw money at. If you'd asked me in 2004, what would I spend £10 million on to grow the business? I didn't have anything in the armory that I could throw £10 million at. And it wasn't really until... So we tried lots of things. And the thing that made us grow was actually viral. It was our customers getting customers, and our customers sending the product out, and people... So we had a year or two when we spent no money on customer acquisition because we didn't have any. And we grew by 30%. And so perhaps one lesson I learned from that is that customer acquisition and customer retention is everything. Repeat business is everything in a business. And that's what I look for when I'm looking at investments now. Is there evidence that people have bought it, they liked it, and they came back? Because in any business where all you're doing is spending X to acquire a customer and then churning them straight away, it's just a soulless business to be in. So you need to be in something where you confidently feel as though you're adding layers of loyal customers. And so that bit we got right. We got a great product, we got a great service, and when we did get customers, then they stuck with us. So we had a certain amount through paid for search. We had there were various advertising campaigns that weren't really scalable because they were too expensive. But those customers then begat other customers, and so the whole thing rolled on. It wasn't growing very fast, but it was growing at 30% a year without any marketing spend at all. When I look back now at all the other businesses that I've invested in, that's pretty remarkable. It's practically unheard of. So that was the key to it. And then when we discovered, not that we discovered television had been invented before our time, but we discovered the joys of TV advertising when we had broken even, and after about 5 years. So finally, this sort of slow organic growth took us to a point where we broke even. And we had about £80,000 of profit that we made that year. So first of all, I knew we were going to survive. So I could afford to risk that £80,000 on a bigger risk. And TV was quite a chunky test to do. you can do a lot of campaigns. You can test a few channels with £2,000, £3,000, £4,000, but TV was basically going to be about £100,000 to put together an advert and then spend the money on £50,000 of media time. So we got the spare money and we thought, right, let's do it. The one thing we haven't tried is TV, and we did have a small competitor who had this Remind4You company who did a TV ad, and we looked at that. We were also measuring what they did. That was a little bit of industrial espionage. We'd simply buy a card from them every month and look at the order number and then compare it with last month's order number, and that simple little bit of information gave us some idea of the volume that they were getting, so armed with that, we worked out that their campaign had got them customers at about £10 a customer, which was doable for us. So we thought, well, let's give it a go. So we made the advert and we put it out there, and it worked very well. And so we then doubled that amount, and we took some of the money that we made from our customers from that campaign, and we doubled it from 50,000. The next month we did 100,000, then 200,000, then 400,000, then 800,000, and all of that marketing was paid for from sales that were being driven by the previous month. So that took us from a position of really spending no money on marketing to spending £10 million a year on TV within a year, and that transformed the business from turning over 3 million and making a little bit of profit to turning over 45 million and making I think 13 million profit in 3 years. So that's pretty astronomical growth. But for me, it was always about test and test and test all the different channels and then when you find something that reliably gives you the right cost to customer acquisition, and if you understand how your customers behave and how often they come back, then you can mathematically work out how much you can afford to spend on marketing. And there's a lot of maths involved, and one thing I often say when it comes to recruiting marketing people is that it is easier to teach a mathematician how to do marketing than it is to teach a marketing person to do maths. And maths is important. It's important to understand the numbers. You have to have creatives involved, but you've also got to have people who can understand the numbers, understand what's going on under the bonnet of your business, and understanding what's likely to happen if you do something over time.
So it's analytical, but a little bit of bravery as well.
Yeah, I think you have to. You always have to stick your neck out a bit, and try things.
So, Nick, you sold the business in 2011. That's correct. Talk us through your thought process running up to that, because I think when you've spoken previously, you've said that you knew you'd taken it as far as you could. Could you talk us a little bit about that to us? Well,
I think I think the business the business clearly went on further, but I felt as though I had done everything that I was going to add to the business, and there also comes a certain point as a founder where you then actually have quite a lot of money tied up in it, and it represents most of your assets. And I've seen too many companies that have grown and expanded and done really, really well, and then just slid into obscurity. And so that's always the back of your mind. And I thoroughly enjoyed the time that I spent growing it, but I running a well-managed business day to day is less exciting, and so selling it was both financially it was an opportunity to de-risk, I suppose. And it was definitely going to be more money than I needed, and so that was fine, and it would have given me the opportunity to do all sorts of other things in life, so that was a big plus. So it's a fairly natural step to take, and of course, you don't sell a business if there isn't more growth in it, because no one's going to buy it unless you can demonstrate that there's more growth in it. And I do think when it comes to selling a business that there's some real satisfaction to be had in watching a business actually grow afterwards. You don't want it to grow tenfold in the next year, because then you really did miss out. But you have to leave something on the table for the next person. And I would hate to have seen Moonpig be bought for what they paid for it, and then see it slip away within a year or two. That often happens. People misjudge. They just buy a business at a peak. And
so a lot of people will be wondering what you did next. So once you sold Moonpig, what have you done since there?
Well, I took a little bit of time out, took a few months out, and then I was approached about the role of a CEO of a charity called ART. And I had set up my own foundation about 3 years before that, and I was interested in philanthropy and interested in what you can do in the world of charity. So it was an ideal opportunity, really. It wasn't something I hadn't gone out thinking I was actively seeking a job in the charity sector. But mostly because, to be honest, I wasn't sure that I was particularly employable. But this, I did that for a year as a CEO, and then I became a trustee there for another 3 or 4 years, and that was a fascinating insight into the world of charity and how it would work. I did that. That took up quite a bit of time, and since then I've done quite a lot of investing in other people's companies. I did a brief stint on Dragon's Den for 2 years, and that led to more investing. And so I've had a period now of probably 10 years of investing in other people's companies.
And I think one of the things that you said that really resonated with me last time I saw you is that a holiday isn't a holiday unless it's between things. Yes,
that's very true. I took 6 months off, and I've done this before. When I left Russia, I came back and took 6 months off, and I found that initially I was exhausted and I wanted to go on holiday. And after about 3 months of going on holiday quite a lot, going on holiday no longer had a meaning because it's when it's bookmarked between two periods of hard work, you really appreciate it. Whereas that it just in its own right, it seems appealing, the idea of just going traveling. That what I did realize is actually quite pointless. And I found I got to a point where I needed to learn something, where every time I traveled, I needed to learn something. So I went off to Costa Rica to learn Spanish. And so you can get bored of learning. And that's perhaps another lesson I learned from the sale of Moonpig is that no matter how much money you've got, learning is still very, very interesting.
And I think one final question before we move on, Nick. It's something that a number of people have said to me over time, but if you looked back today at it all, would you start the business again?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I look back at it and realise what an unbelievable business model I stumbled upon. I mean, there's an element of luck in it. It was luck that I wanted to start a business at the time that the internet was suddenly beginning to froth. But I stumbled upon an incredible business model there. Where we got paid, and the model was great in the sense that customers would pay us and we would pay our suppliers after 60 days. Most people end up with, as they grow, with a big working capital requirement because they buy stock, and as they sell more, they have to buy more stock, and so they need more capital tied up in that. Whereas we took payment and then we paid our suppliers at 60 days. So we had a positive cash cycle. And it was a great product. And also, I genuinely loved hearing stories of people enjoying the product. I mean, it really made my day to hear of someone who, or to go to a party and see a really well personalised Moonpig card sitting on someone's mantelpiece. Love that.
Did you just get sent lots of Moonpig cards yourself?
Well, I do. I think some people shy away from it because they think I can't send them one of his own cards. But I never get bored of receiving them.
I can imagine. Nick, thank you very much for joining us today. I think everyone has probably found your insights very helpful. This is Rebecca Tunstall of Inspired Sounds.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you've enjoyed listening and watching. To tune in and meet our next exciting guest in the Inspired Sounds series, press the follow and subscribe button. Goodbye.